Welcome to Behind the Line, the podcast where you'll get untold stories from first responders and military veterans. I'm Tim Hegman. I'll be your host. On December 27th, 1993, just after 11 p.m., Officer Martin Ganz of the Manhattan Beach Police Department was shot several times and killed during a traffic stop. That night, Officer Ganz' 12-year-old nephew, who was with him on a ride-along, witnessed his uncle being shot several times. The nephew used the police radio in the patrol car to call for help.
Southern Manhattan 2 Mary 74. Southern Manhattan 2 Lincoln 3 Sam.
37.
2 Lincoln 3 Sam. 2 Mary 74, his emergency flasher went off. His last location was Artesia west of Aviation.
Hello, someone's been shot. Hello, can anyone hear me? 12-4, I'm near there. Hello, I'm at the Manhattan Village Mall. An officer's been shot. It was by a gray Honda type Volkswagen. He's lying, he needs help. That's just like Mary 74's right across Mahogany Dog. Officer down, shot bad.
Working that night was Jessica Jones. She was assigned to the Manhattan Beach Police Department as the dispatcher. Jessica was the first person who heard the nephew call for help. Please welcome Jessica Jones.
Hi, Tim.
Welcome to the Behind the Line podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you're very welcome. Those words from Martin Ganz' nephew, I would just call him Martin or Marty, as we knew him as, obviously in distress, fearful, frightened for his life, just watched his uncle shot several times, and he's only 12 years old. And he screams those words into the police radio in the police car, and the first person who heard those words was you.
Yes.
That's a powerful thing.
Oh, yeah. Very powerful.
And with that, do you recall that night? I mean, that was in 1993.
Right. Almost, it's going to be 29 years, almost 30 years. I do recall that night in pretty vivid detail on certain points. You mentioned his nephew calling out over the radio. I think for me, that has kind of haunted me for the past 29 years, almost 29 years. I've never heard anything like that before. I never heard anything like that before, and certainly not since. It was kind of indescribable unless you heard it. And at the time, I certainly didn't know even what I was listening to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when did you start working as a dispatcher? What year? Do you remember?
I started with RCC in 1992. And
wow.
Yeah, so I started, and when I began working there, they started you off as a complaint taker. So you were answering the phones, the 911 calls, and they train you on that. They get you proficient in that. So I want to say I did that maybe 6 to 9 months, and then I started being trained as a police dispatcher. Now, working as a complaint taker, I was able to see I got that job down, and then I got to see what was going on. I didn't have any idea what the dispatchers did. I had no clue till I started working there, and I realized that's a huge job. It's a huge responsibility. So I got trained in dispatch, and I'd probably been a dispatcher for maybe 6 months. I can't remember exactly when I started, but I was relatively new. And at the time, we had 4 different cities. We had Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, Gardena, and Hawthorne. And I remember that Manhattan Beach and El Segundo was always kind of where you wanted to be sitting at nighttime. And I was working the graveyard shift, I believe, at the time. And that was the place where I thought, oh, this is a nice, pleasant, this is going to be a pleasant evening.
Right.
Nothing much goes on.
Right.
It's not like Hawthorne or Gardena. It's kind of like, okay, it'll be chill or whatever. Right after Christmas. So I was just kind of hoping for a good, uneventful night. Everybody's safe. Everybody goes home, at the end of the shift or whatever. And obviously, it didn't happen like that.
Right. So, you were obviously new.
Yes.
As a dispatcher.
Yes.
But prior to becoming a call taker, dispatcher, you went through some training?
I did. I did go through some training.
And did any of this take place during your training, meaning a call like this?
No. There was the code for this, the 999 code.
Yes.
Which, is like the worst, right? There was like the 997. I think there was a 998 and the 999, but it was kind of like, well, one of those abstract things like those, that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
I don't need to, it's one of those things I don't think they can adequately prepare you for unless there's already a precedent where someone says, hey, look, this happened. My trainer would have said, this happened to me. I don't know. For me, I didn't feel adequately prepared, but I don't think that anything could have prepared me for that. Honestly, yeah.
Do you recall prior to hearing the nephew, and you saying you work in Manhattan, El Segundo, it should be a relaxed night?
Yeah.
Pretty mellow.
You guys are always very polite, too. Right? Much more polite than old Hawthorne and Gardena. I'm just kidding. Don't tell them I said that.
Hopefully they don't see this. No, all in fun. All in fun.
Yes, of course.
But do you recall what you were doing? Obviously you're at your desk.
Yeah.
But do you recall what you were doing just prior to hearing those screams?
I was sitting there. I, had my units up on the screen. You look, everything's fine. Nobody, from what I recall, nobody was out on anything. So I didn't have an inkling on about anybody being on any kind of a dangerous situation. You always had to be at the ready, right? You always had to be aware that anything could happen at any time. And so I felt like I had this all under control. I had my little scratch paper right in front of me. Like I'm just sitting there. We didn't have phones or anything at the time. We probably had the TV on. And honestly, what time did it? It was maybe about 11:30.
Just after 11 o'clock.
Okay, right. So I'm sitting there. I'd probably been there about an hour. I started at 10 at the time. And nothing's going on. So what was I doing right before that? Nothing. Just sitting there and just being ready. Don't remember if maybe I don't even think I had a book. I was probably chatting with my coworkers.
Right.
Yeah, because we were, a very social bunch, or I was checking out to see whatever, was going on in Hawthorne or Gardena or the fire or whatever, catching up on people's Christmas plans, what people were doing, or the new year, like what people had going on. And yeah, and then it kind of, from what I remember, it was very quiet and it sort of came out of nowhere.
And do you remember when you heard that out of nowhere, do you remember what you did or your reaction? Like, did I just hear that, or what was that, or what happened?
That's what my reaction was. As I recall, Tim, it was, what did I just hear? And to me at the time, it did not sound the way it did when I listened to it again later on. When I heard it, I knew it was weird. I knew it was strange, and I hadn't experienced anything like that before, but I wasn't sure. It didn't give me it didn't give me a bad feeling. It was more like, what was that? That's weird. I don't have anybody out. I don't see anybody on a call. So I was just kind of like, all right, we'll see if that happens again. Sometimes we would have bleed over,
right?
Strange, sounds come out. And I thought, well, maybe this is just one of those things. And then I think it happened again. I think I heard it again. And I was like, okay, now this is really strange. And at some point, somebody said something, said South Bay. I think they said South Bay. Like, do you show somebody out somewhere? Does anybody know what that is?
Is that from probably another officer?
I
wondering?
believe an officer came on and said, South Bay, like, do you know what that is? And at the time, I don't recall them being panicked or anybody raising the alarm. And I kind of thought, well, okay, I'm not crazy because is everybody else hearing this? Also, I was like, well, is this just me? Am I just hearing this myself? Because nobody's like saying anything. But let's just see where this goes. Oh my goodness. And then, then when somebody said something, I think then I was like, okay, I don't recall exactly how it went down as far as like, did I do a roll call? Did I check on the units? I don't know if I did that or not.
Do you recall if at some point after that, somebody at the scene of where the shooting took place got on a radio or somebody said, hey, this is what's going on?
What I do remember happening is somebody said, Ganz has his nephew with him tonight. Does anybody know do you know where Ganz is? Where does Ganz show? What was his last location? It kind of sounds like Gans's nephew. And I was like, Ganz, who? I mean, I knew Ganz, 2 Mary 7. He wasn't 2 Mary 7 2, 2 Mary 7 4. I'm sorry.
No, me too. I forget now.
I forget. That's sad. Anyway, I knew that, but I didn't know. I didn't know Martin Ganz, and I thought, well, what are they talking about? A nephew? I didn't know that there was a ride along. Not that I necessarily needed to know that information, right. But anyway, I was very confused. And then I started to feel like, oh my God, like what this is not right. I may not be the most seasoned veteran here, but this is not good. Then I started feeling like, okay, this is weird. Oh no, what is going on?
So with that feeling, did something kick in? Did your training kick in? Did your instincts kick in? Like, okay, I have to do something?
Well, I think somebody came on the radio and said, I saw Ganz somewhere. Like, hey, I think I saw him over by the mall or something. I'm going to roll over there. Now, I hope I'm not like I don't remember. I don't know if you have the transcripts, but I don't remember exactly. So
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's your memory.
But this is what I'm remembering. And then one of the officers was like, okay, I think I saw him over here. And then I think most of the officers, like you guys would do, you guys would all roll over there. And then the other officers went over there. Followed suit or whatever. So, because then I think they were very concerned, obviously, as well, because they thought, oh boy, why is, if it's Gans's nephew. That's what I remember happening.
And then at some point, do you remember being told, we're here, this is what we have?
I do remember. It had to have happened. I'll be honest, my memory on that part isn't very clear. Like as far as what was said, I think because when I heard, I think I was a little bit shocked and in disbelief. I had no idea. I was just kind of like, oh my God, so you have to roll the world. And I probably shouted out to my coworkers, like, this is happening. And maybe Hawthorne was already aware of it. They listened to each other's, frequencies or whatever. So I think it all happened very quickly. And then it was just a flurry of activity after that and making phone calls and everybody kind of coming together in the dispatch center to help and to, make the phone calls that needed to be made and set up the perimeter. I mean, it was because it had just happened, and they thought that the suspect was probably still in the area. I mean, I just remember it being just this huge undertaking. And I think I mean, I hope my training, kicked in. I feel like it did, but honestly, Tim, like thinking back, I remember the sound, the thing that is most significant from that night is the nephew's, his what I now know was screaming and wailing, and it was just this almost an inhuman sound. I mean, that's how I would describe it. And after that, it was just kind of, I think the adrenaline kicked in.
And you had a job to do.
And I had a job to do. Yes.
Do you remember when you learned or somehow found out, or when you found out that Martin Ganz had been shot?
Oh, yeah.
Your reaction or what you thought at the time, your emotions?
I think I felt like he's not going to die though. Like that's not going to happen. He's going to be fine. Like they went and they were going to save him. Like, and the fire department's going to go and they're going to rescue him. He'll be fine. He's not going to die. That doesn't happen. And I think I knew it was serious, but I was like in denial, like, oh, like he's going to go to the hospital. They'll fix him. The doctors will fix him up. He'll just be, no big deal. It was, yeah.
How is it, if you can describe? So, the police officers, the firefighters, we are, when you dispatch us to a call, we actually go to the call, we can see firsthand and deal with it. What's it like for a dispatcher to dispatch a police officer or a firefighter to a call, a serious call, the call you never want to dispatch or respond to? But what's it like not being there, but having to coordinate people to get there?
It's very difficult because there's a lot of factors at play, right? So you have to be able to multitask and to keep things straight. And I don't know if it made it harder back in the olden days with like less technology. So I'm sure RCC has come like a long way since I worked there. But it's very difficult to coordinate everything and not to be able to see. And then sometimes it's hard to hear. And then there's people that are talking over, each other. And it's a very high emotional. It's an emotional, like I was there in the dispatch center. I wasn't on scene. So not being able to see what's happening and to, you just hear this when the officers would come on or the fire department would come on, I imagine, since I wasn't dispatching fire, just the emotions, like there was no hiding like what was going on. So you could hear the stress in their voices and the emotion, and so I kind of got from them too, like this is bad. Like, this isn't good. Like this is real bad. Like it was really scary. And some of the things that they would say, I was like, wait, what? Like what? I didn't quite understand necessarily what was happening because I'd never dealt with any kind of a crime like that or a call like that. So some of those things where, different agencies were coming in and how we had to notify all the other, South Bay agencies and even, other ones, the sheriffs and LAPD and that. And really just a whole different experience for me, which was already, added to the fact that I really, was new. I mean, this was already so new to me, just working with the police department and working with the public like that. It was so just different. I mean, yeah.
Do you recall anything? Does anything come to mind that I remember an officer saying this over the radio? Anything like that?
I don't think that, I mean, I'm sure, because I've watched or I've done research, I don't think I have an actual genuine memory of what was said. I have pictured things in my head that I'm sure probably happened, but I can't say. Because now I know, I watched a documentary and now I know the person that was first on scene.
Yes.
And I was actually very close with that person for a time. And I was like thinking about that the other day. I thought, what was because I met him after this happened, and we became friends. And so I was like, did we really talk about this? Like, I knew it was something that was, near and dear to his heart that really affected him.
Yes.
But as far as talking about it and, his experience, I thought, did I even know that was him? I mean, surely it was just changed his life. I know it did. So yeah. So, I'm picturing him, but I think only because I know now that he was the first on scene, and he must have sounded very emotional and yeah.
And you're talking about an officer that rolled on scene.
Yes.
Being that person. Yes.
Yeah. Being that person. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, because the documentary prior to going on, we talked about that.
Yes.
And I think it's important to also say because you mentioned the multitasking. So obviously you are working this call.
Yes.
You have other people from the dispatch center helping you with this.
Right.
At the same time, you have other cities that you have to make sure if a call comes out, officers get to that call, or fire personnel get to that call.
Yeah.
So you can't just
Things
ignore
don't just
everything
shut
else.
down.
Things don't shut down.
Yeah.
Well said. So you're multitasking that and dealing with other calls, maybe in the same city, but obviously there's 3 other cities that you are responsible for, the dispatch center. So there's a lot going on. That's why when we talked about the stress level of and the multitasking skill of dispatchers is incredible.
Right. You have to keep a lot of things straight, a lot of information straight, and you have to be calm while you're doing it. You can't just flip out and start screaming. That's like all part of the same job, and it's a lot. And when the shit hits the fan, excuse me, then I think that's what you're really trained for. You're not, a chill night in Manhattan, El Segundo. That's not why you receive all the training. The training is so that you'll be ready for when something really big and bad happens, something that you don't want to think about, something that you don't want to have happen. But, that's what you're being trained for, really.
Yeah. And, the thing is, on a prior podcast, we talked to an officer about training and the importance of training, because the more you train, the more you're prepared.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you're training all the time. And you may not be responding to those types of incidents that you're training for, but when that incident, you're called to that,
right,
your training kicks in.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, where repetition is important. They talk about, they want to do like safe, at the schools, they want to do like school shooter trainings, right? And, people are very upset about that. And parents don't, they don't want that for their children. They don't want their children to live in a world like that. But on the other hand, like, that's a reality of something that can happen, unfortunately. And so I think it's good to practice things. You get good at what you practice, right?
Yes, that's right.
And if you practice these things, and I think sometimes your mind has to jump a hurdle, and I don't know how police officers do it, with their training and the making decisions that they have to make to keep them and the public safe or whatever. But I do think that you've got to accept that this is a possibility, and only with repetition and practice are you going to get good at handling a situation like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And being new, and you've been fresh out of training for the most part. That helped. Mm-hmm. Do you remember, or was there ever a time during the call, after the call, recently after the call, or even longer after the call, longer duration, in thinking about this, about what happened to Martin Ganz? Did you ever get angry or sad or emotional or just really ticked off?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Angry at the suspect. I mean, first of all, angry at that guy. Angry. I wished I was there's a time where I thought, oh man, I wished I would have done something differently. I wish I would have known, or, known what that sound was quicker, or been able to send people to the right place right away and had a different outcome. Sad. I think sadder as time has gone on, because I think at the time, being young myself, and kind of like it took time for that to evolve, the incident to evolve in my head, and to really wrap my mind around what happened that night, like the enormity of what happened, right? Of such a young person and his life, snuffed out in a heartbeat, like less than a heartbeat. I mean, just like that, a police officer. So I think that, over the years I've had different emotions about it. And now that I'm older, almost 30 years later, it really hits home, and it really hits hard, because that's, it was somebody's child, and he's like 20. Was he 29?
I don't recall, but
yeah,
young,
he was young forever. And, to me, I was like, oh, like he's older than me. I was 21 at the time. He was older than me. But, so to me, when I'm 21, almost 30 seems like, oh, he's really up there.
Yes.
But I mean, I was like thinking back now, like, man, he's been gone almost like longer than he like was alive. It's just your perspective changes, I think, with age and your experiences, and it's like, man, that's just big. It's huge.
Yeah, you beat me to that question, because I was going to ask, since then to even today, between those years, were there ever times that you had difficulty dealing with, what you were a part of with Martin? And you talked about, maybe second guessing yourself. Was I quicker?
Yeah.
And
Of course. I mean, I think that's only natural. I know that, the way things happen in life, that you can second guess yourself, and you can say, well, I could have done something differently and this wouldn't have happened. But I think the truth is, more often than not, is that, maybe it could have been different, but then again, maybe it wouldn't have been, and it wouldn't have made a difference. It's just like you make the decision you make at the time, and then, but everything had to be in alignment for what happened. It had to happen, like it had to happen that way,
Right.
with the good lucky things that occur to us. We don't question those things. We just think like, man, like I was so lucky or whatever. But then when you look at the bad things that happen, and you see how that happens kind of the same way, like people have to be in the certain place at the certain time, and Roger Hoan Brady had to be there. Martin had to be there. Why was he working? Why did he take his nephew on the ride? Like everything that could have possibly gone wrong, like all those things just came together.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I hope maybe I tell myself that to make me feel better. But I do think that maybe it would have happened no matter what. I don't know. Could I have done anything different? I don't know.
Yeah.
I choose not to take responsibility.
Yeah. Don't. You shouldn't have to dwell on that for yourself. And
I do remember there was someone at work at my job at the time who definitely was very angry with me. And so I mean, that was like, wow, oh shoot, like, am I responsible for this? That, and I still remember. I remember exactly who it was and her name and everything. And it's funny, like that has stayed with me. It's
wow.
Like, oh, maybe she was right. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't dwell on it if I were you.
Okay.
Easier for me to say, but
yeah.
You did what you did, and I think it was you were working and got people there.
Yeah.
So. So you started in 92.
Yes.
This incident happened in 93.
Mm-hmm.
when did you stop working at RCC?
I stopped working at RCC in 1999.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I went on maternity leave April of 1999, and my plan was to return in September. Yeah, whatever the 3 months were, 4 months, and then to return. And my partner at the time, the longer I was away from, once I had my baby, my
Yes.
first child, and I was very young, so old, 27, but still pretty young. And once I had her, I was like, I really don't want to leave. Like, I don't want to leave her. I want to stay home with her. And my partner at the time, when we talked about it, he was very, very supportive and said, okay, you don't have to go back if you don't want to, and which was very lovely of him. And so I got to stay home with my daughter. And I resigned from RCC.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So you served a number of years.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
7.5 years, technically, yeah.
Oh, good.
But I feel like I worked there longer.
Right.
That's
Sure.
how I feel.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a lot of stress.
It's a lot of stress.
A lot of responsibility.
Yeah. I still have dreams of being there and like not knowing what to do and like the worst things happening. And then they just say like, oh, go sit over here and just start dispatching. And I'm like, why am I even here in my dream?
Yeah.
Why did I do that? Why did I come back? This is too stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
So let me ask you. So
Sure.
did you know Martin Ganz? Had you ever met him or seen him?
Nope.
Never.
I didn't know. I did not know Martin Ganz at all. I had never seen him. I'm sure I sent him out on calls, or I'm sure I did traffic stops for him.
Right.
But my exposure to officers in general was pretty minimal because we didn't really have, since we were in Hawthorne,
Yes.
occasionally the Hawthorne guys would stop by. That was more common. But like Manhattan Beach and El Segundo, I didn't even know, what he looked like or anything till I saw his little face in the picture. And
Is there anything you want that you think is important that you want people, listeners or the viewers of this podcast to know about 911 dispatchers that they may not know?
I want people to understand, at least in my experience now, that working with the public was one thing and taking 911 calls, because I always get the question like, isn't it stressful when people call you? And I always tell people that was the easy part to me. Taking that information down, being, getting the information out there to over to the dispatchers was easy. What was really difficult and really a challenge that I had not anticipated was feeling responsible for those officers. And I would hear dispatchers say like, oh, they're my officers. And I would be like, I didn't really get it until I was a dispatcher. And I was like, oh, I see. Like, you are their lifeline.
That's right.
And if something happens and they need help, you're going to be the one setting up the perimeter for the foot pursuit, or the, when they're pursuing a car, or if there's shots fired, or they need the paramedics. So I want people to know that dispatching and being responsible for those officers is really the challenge and really important. And I always make the joke now, like if I'm stressed out about my job, I work with preschoolers now. Sometimes I do I'm a little afraid of those guys.
Yeah.
Because they're strong. But I always think to myself, Jessica, like, lives are not on the line now. Like back then,
right.
Lives were on the line, and police officers' lives, firefighters. And you guys do the most valuable work. One of the most valuable professions. Both the firefighters and the police officers to me are just like, oh, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
It's interesting. I shared this with you already, but I've said, for many, many, many years, there's no way I could be a dispatcher.
Yeah.
A call, a complaint taker. There's no way. And when I was working and I was a field training officer, I would, one of the first things I'd tell trainees is like, hey, there's two people you do not want to upset. That's our front desk and our dispatcher. Do not make them upset.
Right.
That's
right.
A lot of respect for you guys. And, it's important too that, the call takers and the dispatchers, and it's a lot of responsibility for those dispatchers. Like you said, our officers, our firefighters, you take that on. But another thing that dispatchers and the complaint takers do is you yourselves save lives. I mean, there are times people call in, they're calling 911 because of an emergency. Sometimes that emergency is an infant who is choking, a person who is choking, a person who is non-responsive. And it's the call taker, the dispatcher, who's on the phone, not physically there.
Right.
Because of training, experience, and resources that walk those people through what needs to be done to save that infant, that child, the whoever.
Right.
And there are so many times where, because of what a dispatcher or a call taker instructs someone to do, a life is saved.
Yeah, this is true.
And that's it's difficult to do it. In person. For a police officer, they don't do it all the time. They definitely do it. For a firefighter, paramedic, they're doing it on a daily basis.
Right.
They're physically there.
Yeah.
But to do it over the phone and to walk someone through it, that's a skill.
Well, and also I think too, being that person that gets the call and is able to walk through CPR with the person.
Yes.
It's the minutes, right? The minutes that people are without oxygen, or that's what's really vital. So if you have to wait for somebody to get there to do it, rather than being able to instruct somebody on the phone, and that's why we had to be CPR trained, and we had to go through this course. Remember, a 3-day training course to keep ourselves up on those skills. And we had to have the certification to give the directions on the phone, which was something I had no idea. I thought, oh, you can't just, you had to be certified to do that. So
yes,
very interesting.
A lot of training goes into that.
A lot of training. Yeah.
Well, I think all of us, if someone has not called 911, unfortunately, there's going to be a time, more than likely, they're going to have to call 911. And they're going to talk to a complaint taker or dispatcher. And the professionalism that you display as a dispatcher and working in a 911 center deserves a lot of respect because you're the lifeline in many cases, and you're getting people, police officers and firefighters, to calls where people need help. And I'm telling you, after 33 years and hearing thousands of radio calls, literally, that's a special person who sits behind a microphone and dispatches those calls. So I think people need to understand, and it's my goal to give a platform to our first responders, military veterans, and the dispatchers as well, who I consider part of the first responders, to get their voice out to tell their story. And I wanted to talk about Martin Ganz, and I wanted to talk to someone who wasn't there, but who played a vital role in this whole situation. Yeah. And after some research and work, I was able to track you down. You were kind enough to take my phone call.
Yeah.
And I thank you for your time as a dispatcher, for all that you did, specifically to December 27th of 1993, hearing those screams, acting on those screams, and reverting back to your training to get people, fire, police, whoever, to that scene, do all they could to save Martin. And it was Roger Brady who killed him, but it was all the first responders and dispatchers who did their best and their best to help Martin. It just didn't, it's unfortunate that he was killed, but there's a lot of people, including yourself, who did all they could to save him. Right. So
thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to visit us today on the Behind the Line podcast. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like the show, please follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the show notes from each episode, visit behindthelinepod.com. If you want to support the show and hear more from our first responders and military veterans, head over to patreon.com/behindtheline. I'll see you on the next one.